Our DNA test showed a strong match between Rosanne Cash's DNA and that of other people in our series. Proof of a family member she didn't know she had. Many times, Johnny Cash, the rebel, the voice of the outsiders, and the icon of American music, talked about his Native American roots. He sang for those who were shut up and stood with those who were left out. But new DNA tests have called that claim into question and shown that his family history is deeper and more complicated than that. What made his family believe this for so many years? Was it a real mistake, or was it a lie meant to hide something more troubling? What does this new information mean for the memory of a man who stood for honesty? We'll look at the genetic proof, find out where the myth came from, and find the surprising facts that changed the story of Johnny Cash. The public story was based on a lie. Johnny Cash was more than just a singing star for many years. He was a sign. A tall, cloaked figure that stands for the restless spirit of America's ignored and abused. His deep voice and haunting words didn't just reverberate off of radio speakers, they became part of the culture of a country that was having a hard time with its morals. People saw in him a man who had been through pain and healing and who knew what it was like to be hurt without having to explain it. He didn't just sing about being in jail or having a hard time in the country. So we thought. He felt those words. But beneath the myths, an identity that was more complicated and maybe even made up was slowly taking shape. Johnny Cash's claim of Cherokee heritage was one of the things that stuck out in his personal story. That wasn't a small, unimportant thing or a joke. For many years, it was a big part of who he was in public. In conversations, he was honest about it. He talked about it when he talked about how he feels about life, justice, and faith. He used it in his art too. Cash put out an album called Bitter Tears, Ballads of the American Indians in 1964. At the time, the project was a big deal for a country singer. It was a protest album about Native American problems during a time of high civil unrest in the U.S. He not only made songs about how Native people were hurt and how unfair things were, but he also fought hard for the album. When country radio stations wouldn't play it, he ran a full-page ad in Billboard magazine criticizing the business for being quiet and cowardly. That moment cemented his image as a man who wouldn't back down from telling the truth and whose music wasn't about following the latest trends, but about what was right. For millions of fans, Cash's Native American background helped them understand his spirituality, his ability to care about others, and his link to wrongdoing. It made sense. There was a man whose blood linked him to people who had been hurt, moved, and forgotten. The stories worked. It went with the story as a whole. He kept up that name for many years. He even appeared in a TV show with a Native American theme. When he talked about his religion, he talked about tribal spirituality. His all-black outfit seemed to fit with the themes of grief and struggle. But the story was strong enough to fall apart in 2021. That year, Johnny Cash's daughter Rosanne Cash, who is also a famous musician and activist, went on the PBS genealogy show Finding Your Roots to show how family stories are told. That she and her father were Cherokee was something she thought about her whole life. It wasn't said that it was just an idea. It was taken as true. It became an emotional truth that was passed down from generation to generation through stories about the family. But when the test results came back, they showed that the story was not true. There were no signs of Native American heritage in Rosanne's DNA. Not a single one. The story, which has been told over and over again in interviews, albums, and public comments, doesn't make sense from a biological point of view. It made me wonder about some parts of Cash's life. But it did a lot to hurt a very important part of the persona that made his job possible. But this common sense wasn't really a conflict, it was more like a door. Native American heritage used to show that Cash cared about people who were on the outside, but DNA showed something much stranger and more complicated. Not having any Cherokee blood was only half of the story. What the test did show was a secret past that Johnny Cash may not have known about himself. That changes everything, though. The discovery of DNA. When Rosanne Cash watched her Finding Your Roots show, she thought she would find out what she thought was family truth. She grew up hearing stories about her Cherokee ancestry that came straight from her father. She most likely was looking forward to a moment of approval. Instead, she was given a reveal so important that it shook Johnny Cash's public image and, maybe without her knowing it, her own as well. It was easy to see the test findings. Roseanne did not have any Native American heritage in her DNA. Not at all. There wasn't even a small amount that could be explained away or ignored. The host, Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., said that the sequence was complete. The facts couldn't be argued with. The family story that had shaped people's identities, motivated them to take action, and helped spread a lie about Johnny Cash was, in fact, not true. That was not the end of the truth, though. As the research went deeper, a much more surprising finding came to light. It was possible to find sub-Saharan African DNA in Roseanne, but it wasn't from her mother's side. It was from her father's. This made it sound like her African ancestry came from Johnny Cash himself. What that meant was shocking. Johnny Cash was born in the deeply segregated American South in 1932. He looked and was socially classified as white, and he built his career in the mostly white world of country music, even though his African American heritage had been buried, forgotten, or purposely hidden. Is Johnny in Ireland not thinking about his roots? It's possible that he knew something and thought it would be best to keep it to himself since he would have been praised by everyone in his culture at the time. There is, however, no better answer than speculation when it comes to scholars or family members. Most likely, he didn't. Not a single check, letter, record or recommendation, not even a quiet one. From what he could tell, it would have been hidden by everything that happened many years before he was born. Really hidden under deception, most likely because of necessity and not because they are lying. In the American South, especially in the 1800s and early 1900s, families with unclear or mixed racial backgrounds would often say they were Native American as a socially accepted way to explain certain physical traits or gaps in their family trees. Most of the time, it was just a story that people heard over and over again until it became true. It's better to be part Cherokee than to say you have a black grandfather, even if that could lead to being left out, hurt, or even killed. So, this new way of looking at things can be seen as one way to correct Johnny Cash's long-standing claim of Native American ancestry. That being said, what if it wasn't just a mistake but an ethnic defense between generations? A story that doesn't lie but must be told to stay alive. In this light, Cash's unsettling connection to these marginalized groups makes sense. Could Johnny Cash's then famous empathy, which included singing protest songs, speaking out for prisoners, and insisting on giving voice to those who didn't have one, come from his own life experiences and an unspoken tradition that runs deep in his family tree? No clear answer can be given to this question. But it forces us to see Cash not only as a man with strong beliefs, but also as someone who may not be aware of how an unrealistic world shapes him. So Cash grew up in an international family as the son of sharecroppers in Arkansas. He had no idea that he was writing a story that was more American, more complicated, and more connected to the country's racial past than he could have imagined. And when did that family link happen? It was traced back to a single, unknown parent. Someone who lived many hundreds of years ago may have changed Johnny Cash's legacy before it even started. Lies and getting by in the South. Families in the South have told stories, some true and some not, for generations to keep their lives and traditions safe. For Johnny Cash, his long-held idea that he was Cherokee wasn't just a harmless family story. It was a way to stay alive, and it was probably meant to hide something much more dangerous in a society separated by race. Ancestry from Africa. The new DNA discovery that Cash's ancestors were from sub-Saharan Africa brings up some troubling questions. Was the Cherokee claim a lie they meant to tell or a defense mechanism they received that helped them get through a harsh world? We need to go back to the 18th and 19th centuries to understand what was at stake, especially in states like Arkansas and Mississippi where Cash has strong roots. Race wasn't just a social difference in that world. It was written down in law. The one-drop rule said that anyone with even a small amount of African blood could be considered colored and lose their rights, property, and social standing. In this kind of system, families with mixed-race traits were often thought to be white, with Native American ancestry being a safer account for traits that were not European. Most likely, this is where the Cash family's Cherokee story started. From 5 to 7 generations ago, someone in the family tree with African roots either decided to lie or was forced to. That story was told for many generations and finally became true. Even though it might have kept the family safe from racial abuse, it also made them anonymous. In the South, this was a usual way to stay alive. Not because they were ashamed, but because they had to. Many families got rid of their African roots. Being honest cost way too much. By saying they were white or part Cherokee, they were safer, had more legal rights, and could take advantage of chances they wouldn't have had otherwise. But in the process, they lost their real ancestry, their culture, and often their sense of being linked to a longer past. Johnny Cash would grow up in a harsh place. He grew up in Arkansas during a time of repression and saw poverty, loneliness, and a strong sense of wrongdoing. He sang a lot for people who couldn't speak up, were in jail, were poor, or had been forgotten. Now we have to ask, did his kindness come from his own pain, or did it come from something deeper? Something passed down from ancestors who knew what it meant to live has been erased. Cash never said in public that he had black heritage. He might not have known. Or maybe he knew deep down that saying that would ruin his career. In the 1950s and 1960s, white gatekeepers ran the world of country music, which was aimed at white people. Even a hint of black blood could get you kicked out of the business. That same society that cheered him on stage would have locked all the doors if his family tree had been made public. The Cherokee myth said that the family's cover was a socially acceptable way to hide any traits or histories that were not clear. The cost was high. Generations of lost identities, cultural ties, and a story that was blown out of proportion to become true. Cash seems to have made a link with outcasts and people on the outside that feels like an old one. His support for Native Americans, care for prisoners, and songs about wrongdoing have the weight of an unacknowledged load. The most important thing about Revelation is that it hurts deeply when stories of going turn into stories of just surviving. We could say that this isn't just a family secret. It is like a mirror that shows the picture of a country that forces a whole group of people to choose between telling the truth and staying alive more than once. And just when things look like they're going to settle down, more questions come up about the Cash family tree. There are signs that this wasn't just a quiet choice made by one family, but part of a bigger, systemic effort to control identity, erase heritage, and change history. He spoke for those who couldn't. Johnny Cash wore black to remember people who had died. He sang for those who were condemned, hooked, poor, or locked up. Fans and historians have said for decades that this was because of how hard he was taught and how strongly he believed in what he did. But now that DNA tests have shown that he has African heritage, a new question comes up. Did Cash's understanding come from his own experiences or from his family history? Cash never did work just to make people happy. A lot of country stars sang about bars and broken hearts, but he went deeper. His songs were about wrongdoing and loss. His shows at Folsom and San Quentin weren't just for fun. It was a message. He sang, "I Wear the Black for the Poor," in his 1971 protest song, "The Man in Black," and "The Hurt," for the prisoner who has already paid for his crime. It wasn't a show when he played music. It had a point. And that mission may have come from more than just a strong belief. His daughter Roseanne's DNA showed that she has sub-Saharan African heritage. This suggests that someone in his family tree lived in bondage or in its shadow. Someone who was enslaved, didn't have papers, or purposely erased from public records. Cash couldn't fully explain how that hidden past may have affected feelings, values, and a way of seeing the world that had been passed down from generation to generation. Generational memory is the idea that pain and survival can be passed down through families like an inheritance, even if no one says a word. Cash's strong desire for fairness. His stubborn kindness and refusal to fit in now seem like more than just artistic decisions. They sound like echoes from his own story, buried deep in time, not from other stories. He had a link to disadvantaged groups that went beyond sympathy. Bitter Tears, Ballads of the American Indian, a record he released in 1964, was a protest against the mistreatment of Native Americans. Cash bought a full-page ad in Billboard to make them feel bad when country radio wouldn't play it. At the time, a lot of people thought his passion came from his own personality. He said his ancestors were Cherokee. However, DNA tests did not show any local lineage. So was it theft or something more sinister? A little. Quite likely. One idea is that being Cherokee was just a family story. One made up to explain traits or emotions that don't fit into the standard race story. People in the South who said they had native blood were one way to hide their African roots. Cash may have truly accepted the native identity, saying it was a socially acceptable alternative to the truth. It gave him a way to express something he couldn't really name, the feeling of being erased and being different. To pass on the loss from one family to the next. The important thing is what he did with that personality. Money Cash spoke out against the war, the poor, and the prison industrial complex at a time when not many country artists did. He did this in interviews and in song after song, even though country music doesn't usually accept criticism. His voice really sounded higher, and he now knew that it had more to it than just acting. Maybe it's biological, a deep connection to those who haven't had a voice for a very long time. Even worse is the fact that Cash may not have known. He liked being a white man in a segregated America because it gave him benefits and blind spots. His art was a powerful reflection of how much he cared. However, he wasn't able to figure out how the understanding worked. He would never fully understand why he was connected to people who were seen as castaways by society. The people in the room and the experts must now start to look at this. He wasn't just pretending to be compassionate, it was built into his very being. Maybe it was an unspoken memory of a deep connection to the problems of the people he tried to help but failed. That let him break the rules about his field in the music business and in popular culture. It's not just in his songs, either. It's written down. In other words, those records tried to hide something. In the counts, there were blank boxes for race and labels that moved around. They whisper the truth that Johnny Cash never got to fully understand because America wasn't ready to hear it. Still, he sang it out loud, straight, and without faltering. What they tried to hide in the records. People were surprised by more than just Johnny Cash fans when the DNA results came out. They rushed historians and genealogists into the files. Census forms, land deeds, and birth records that had been forgotten for a long time were suddenly being looked at closely. It wasn't just a family past that came out. It showed how Americans keep records and how quiet, survival, and purposeful erasure are all woven into the system. In Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi census records from the 1800s, some of Cash's paternal relatives are listed as being of mixed or unclear races. Some were called mulatto, which is a term that has long been used for people who are a mix of African and European ancestry. Some people saw their race change over time. In 10 years, they could be mulatto and the next, white. In some records, the race was not written down at all. These were not mistakes made by the staff. They were ways to stay alive. What was the color line in the South after the Civil War? It was more than just a social line. It was a line between life and death. Where you lived, worked, went to school, or whether you had to follow segregation rules depended on your race. For families with light skin or last names that sound European, passing as white wasn't just a goal. It was for safety. One word on a census form could mean the difference between officially being able to own land and not being able to. Johnny Cash's relatives weren't just forgotten about. They were being sneaky while being seen. It was on purpose that the records were missing information and not making sense. Families and often the people who were recording their information chose not to be clear over telling the truth to escape the problems that came with being called black. This was a planned silence that came from a harsh racial order. At that time, everyone in the South did it that way. African roots were hidden deep by generations of people who were looking for safety. Native American origin myths were added to the story of substitution. Most especially if the made-up family tree included Cherokee ancestry, because that was seen as more likely to be true. One family story would take the place of all the others, and it would be told over and over again until it became true. After that, it wouldn't really be hiding anything by the time it got to Johnny Cash. It would be the new religion. Now that DNA tests and digital archives have been used, we know how widely these mistakes were spread. In a lot of these small places, people turned white, strong, and quiet, and they crossed that unspoken line in society. A lot of the time, churches, courthouses, and local officials helped erase this history by deciding not to keep any records about race. The lack of information was a defense. The property and court records of Cash's extended family are even scarier. Some of your relatives may have been slaves or came from freed slaves who later lived with white people. In the Jim Crow South, you could change your racial identity by living in a different way, staying quiet, and fitting in, as long as no one questioned your story. These little details were very important to Cash, who was born in 1932 in Kingsland, Arkansas, a town with only one way to get around. Instead of research, rumors, and paperwork, race was decided by how someone looked. Being white was seen as a sign of safety, access, and everything else that most people were refused. It was either lucky or planned that their family escaped the signs that would have kept them at the bottom of society's ladders. But the fact that he has such a life doesn't mean that he can't go down a path that includes some racial exclusion. It just proves that they just barely got away. That Cash's family history had to be kept secret is what's really sad. Since the system was in place, being honest cost too much. People like Cash's ancestors had to hide who they were for generations in order to live in a society that was obsessed with racial purity. Now that the truth is coming out, we can finally face what the records tried to hide. This is not a story of shame, but of strength. And Johnny Cash, who was known for a long time as a voice for the lost, may have been speaking about something bigger the whole time. One that is shaped by silence, effort, and the quiet fight to just be. The business that would have wiped him out. The music business like Johnny Cash, but only while he fit the picture they were going for. A white rebel from the South who is edgy but not so much that they upset the race order. If people knew about his African roots when he was at the height of his fame in the 1950s, they would have quickly turned their backs on him. In the middle of the 20th century, racism was a big part of American music. Labels, radio stations, and booking agents that were owned by white people promoted country music as white music. People thought that their stars should look and act like that ideal. Any hint of black ancestry, no matter how far back, would have ended her career. There was more to this than bias. It was about making money. Labels were afraid of losing Southern fans if race lines got fuzzy. People saw Johnny Cash as the voice of white working-class America. They saw him as a criminal who followed the Bible and had a rebellious streak. That image helped him sell songs and fill venues, but it was based on the idea that he was definitely white. If DNA, family background, or even rumors had shown a different racial story, it could have ended everything before it even started. The fact that Cash has African blood wasn't just a footnote in history. It shows how dangerous his rise really was. A strict business about race could keep an artist from the stage even if they were thought to have mixed heritage. There wasn't much room for doubt in country music. When artists crossed those lines, they were often met with pushback and even erased. Lots of examples. Due to the fact that Ray Charles was black, radio stations were hesitant to play his country record when it came out in 1962. Charlie Pride, one of the few black country stars, was told not to let people know who he was in public. Even though Elvis Presley's sound was based on black music styles, he was careful not to look too much like black artists. It was important, and the message was clear. If Johnny Cash had been seen as something other than white in that setting, he might not have made it. There was no Grand Ole Opry, Folsom Prison concerts, or country star. So did the fans. They had very clear and sometimes rigid standards. People in the South wanted performances. That made them think of them. If the truth about Cash's impact came out to the public, it would break the myth and probably end his career. No matter how talented they are. This is where the finding of DNA is both scary and solemn. It doesn't hurt Cash's reputation. It makes it clear how easy it could have been tainted. The business world that praises him might as well bury him. But now that I know this, Cash's art has a new twist. It doesn't seem as natural to him now as his ability to mix church, country, and blues music. There are strong roots in African American music that can be heard in his phrasing, his emotional range, and his love for the downtrodden. Scholars today see blues and spirituals in his work, but not as copies, but as inheritances. It changes everything about his image as the man in black. People who don't have a say or are forgotten told him that they wore black. Given the blood that flows through his veins, it almost feels like a prophecy. He may have been sad about something deeper, a link to a past he didn't even know he had. What's sad about Johnny Cash's family history is not really that he was black. The sad thing is that he never really understood it. He might not have been able to become who he was if everyone knew. But Johnny Cash did not follow the rules, even though he did not know it. He spoke for people who didn't fit in, fought against conformity, and had an American story that the business couldn't handle at the time. Today, that story finally gets to be told, and Johnny Cash changes the course of history. People were more than just interested when Johnny Cash's DNA test showed that he had African heritage. It made people think more deeply about what it means to be American. This wasn't just about one person or his songs. America tells itself lies about race, heritage, and where they fit. For many years, Cash was a sign of white Southern defiance. A poor Arkansas boy became a big name in country music. He had the attitude of an American outlaw. But his impact has been hard to understand. He was a country star who pushed for prison reform and native rights. He was also a devout Christian who struggled with addiction. Now that his black heritage has been found, it adds another layer to his story. One that changes how we see him and how we see the American story. Cash's past wasn't erased by his DNA. It made it better. Fans and scholars had to face a truth that was often ignored. The past of race in America is not easily separated. It's complicated and linked in many ways. Cash was a link between two Americas that no one knew about. One is black and one is white. That have been told for a long time they are different. A strong question is raised by his story. How many other American icons, praised as symbols of whites, have histories that are just as complicated? How much of our cultural identity is based on past that has been cleaned up and made less complicated? Even more so in the South, race lines were not always clear. In a society with different levels of racism, many people pretended to be someone they weren't in order to stay alive. People hid their black ancestry and told stories about their native background instead, which was more socially acceptable. These erases kept people safe, but they took away the truth. The case of Johnny Cash is a scary reminder of the people whose names were lost. Still, as more grace this understanding, the chance it offers is spirit. The strict racial limits are being pushed, for sure. This makes the idea more honest and open, and it reminds us what it means to be American. A warning that there are more than two ways to be human. It has many layers, changes over time, and is often easy to see. Cash may not have known that he was of African descent, but the difficulties of the disadvantaged were at the center of his life's work. He sang for people that people have forgotten about. Those who are locked up, poor, or can't speak up. When we look back, his refusal to follow orders and fight against power seems almost ancestor-like, as if he were carrying the weight of a past that was shaping him from the inside. There are a lot of different ways to look at the past using modern study methods. But how this information is used is still what makes a difference. In Cash's case, it makes his reputation stronger instead of weaker. He doesn't just become a music icon, he also becomes a complicated and contradictory reflection of the American experience, with some strange links. This new chapter in Johnny Cash's life is not so much an ending as it is a beginning. It makes us think about what legacy means and who fits in the American story. People thought that the voice spoke for many people, but maybe it was just sharing his story. Icon Johnny Cash turns into more than that. He shows the real America, which is troubled, diverse, and full of uncomfortable truths that are just ready to come out. His legacy forces us to face that complicated truth, which gives us a way to think about what it means to be American. We don't take away from Johnny Cash's story by accepting the whole truth about his family history. It's more honest now. By doing this, we make it possible for a fuller and more inclusive view of what it means to be American. This is one that values complexity instead of ignoring it. The DNA test on Johnny Cash didn't just show a private matter. An American dream was broken. What do you think? Does this change how we see Johnny Cash? Or does it make his reputation even stronger? Write your answer in the box below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and watch our next movie. Because the next secret past we find could make you question everything you thought you knew.